Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a genuinely massive logistical challenge, the monumental task of measuring poverty in India. I mean, we hear the statistics all the time, right? Poverty is up, poverty is down. But behind those numbers is this incredibly complex system designed to figure out not just how the nation is doing as a whole, but exactly who needs help.
So how do you actually find the poor? Sounds like a pretty basic question, but think about the reality of it for a second. Finding people who need direct assistance requires a staggering amount of coordination. You aren't just looking for numbers on a spreadsheet. You're looking for real humans, real families, spread across vast geographies, living in very, very different conditions.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're talking about counting the poor in a nation of over 1 billion people, or as economists in India usually measure it, over 100 crore people. The sheer scale of this task is absolutely mind-bending. You obviously can't just knock on 1 billion doors every single month to see how the economy is doing. You have to be smart, efficient, and highly strategic. Here's our roadmap for today: the billion-person problem, estimating progress through surveys, perfect sampling, finding beneficiaries with a census, when estimates fail, and finally, the complete economic picture.
All right, Section 1, the billion-person problem.
Moving to Section 2, surveys and estimating national progress. So, on one hand, you have local officials who need to deliver direct, individual help. But on the other hand, policymakers just need to track broad national economic progress, to see if their policies are actually working. When the government wants that national scorecard, they rely on a sample survey. Taking a carefully selected, representative subset of the population is just so much faster. That's exactly why policymakers prefer surveys for frequent, regular economic reporting. They really don't need to speak to every single person to know how the country is doing this quarter. A scientifically backed estimate gives them exactly the data they need to steer the ship.
Think of it like a teacher looking at a classroom chat during an online class. If the teacher asks, "Hey, does everyone understand?" and instantly sees 20 yes messages pop up and maybe 1 no, they can quickly gauge the room. They know right away that roughly 95% of the class gets the concept. They don't need to pause the entire class and wait for every single student to type out a response, right? They take a sample, estimate the outcome, and move forward. Well, economists do the exact same thing, just on a much, much larger scale to save time and resources.
Which brings us to Section 3, the art of perfect sampling. Now, what's really interesting about this is how you actually pull it off. How do you scale down a massive population into a miniature, statistically perfect representation? Well, let's say we know for a fact that the actual national blueprint for a 1 billion person population is 60% rural and 40% urban. We also know the exact male-to-female ratio across these specific areas. To make our survey work, statisticians will shrink that 100 crore population down to a sample of just 1 crore, or 10 million people. But here is the absolute magic of it. That 1 crore sample must maintain the exact demographic ratios of the whole country. It still has to be exactly 60% rural and 40% urban. It must reflect the true male and female demographics perfectly. By doing this, they can speak to literally just 1% of the population, multiply the results, and get a highly accurate estimate of the nation's poverty levels, all without knocking on 1 billion doors. Okay, Section 4, census and finding the beneficiary. And this brilliantly illustrates the real problem we run into. You cannot deliver a bag of grain to a statistical probability. That's the dichotomy we're dealing with here. Broad estimation is fast and it's perfect for national statistics, but the census is about precise, actual measurement. It's literally the only way to achieve accurate beneficiary identification for real people. So, what exactly is a census in this context? Simply put, it's the actual measurement of a population where enumerators go out and speak to every single person. The primary goal here is to prevent what economists call inclusion and exclusion errors, meaning making sure you don't accidentally give aid to someone who doesn't need it, and much more importantly, ensuring you don't skip over someone who is desperately poor. For welfare delivery, the government has to completely abandon the shortcuts of estimation and do the grueling, time-consuming work of asking every individual about their living conditions. And because this data is so incredibly detailed, it doesn't just help today, it fundamentally drives long-term resource allocation for social welfare over the entire next decade. This takes us to Section 5, when estimates fail us. This brings us into a seriously high-stakes reality. If you rely on a broad sample survey for distributing welfare, the margin of error isn't just some harmless number on a chart. It could mean actual starvation or homelessness for an excluded family. Imagine a localized flood crisis, right? A broad national survey might say the state's economy is generally fine, completely missing the disaster entirely. But precise, targeted data tells you exactly which homes were washed away. That is exactly why schemes like the PM Awasya Yojana for housing, MGNREJA for unemployment, or the Antyodaya Anna Yojana for food simply cannot tolerate a 5% margin of error. They require exact, targeted criteria to succeed, and getting that requires speaking to everyone.
To gather this granular data, the government uses the Socio-Economic Caste Census, or SEC. Enumerators literally go door to door asking very specific questions. Do you have a permanent house? Do you cook with gas or coal? Do you own a vehicle? This socioeconomic data is strictly used to identify exactly who needs government benefits. Now, the census also collects data on caste, which, as we know, is a separate, highly politically charged topic of public debate. But purely from an economic welfare standpoint, it's that detailed socioeconomic questionnaire that allows the government to accurately target aid to the exact right households.
Finally, Section 6, the complete economic picture.
So, the crucial point is that to run a country effectively, you actually need both of these disparate methods working together in harmony. The government utilizes the National Sample Survey Office, or NSSO, to conduct things like the Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. This sample survey allows for agile economic steering and regular reporting on national progress. Meanwhile, the broader government of India conducts massive boots-on-the-ground operations like the SEC to achieve precise welfare targeting, ensuring the absolute poorest individuals are identified by name and location.
It's just a fascinating balance of scale versus precision. But it leaves us with a really interesting question for the future. As digital tracking, big data, and technology make it easier and faster to count and interact with every single individual in real time, will our reliance on broad sample estimates just fade away? Could we eventually live in a world where every single economic decision is based on an instant digital census? Definitely something to think about as the realms of economics and technology continue to collide. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the numbers behind the news.